Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Good evening. Welcome. We'll give it about another minute to let other folks come in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, I think that we can just get started with at least my intro and the program's intro, and then as people continue to come in. Um, Feel free to put your name and where you're coming from in the chat if you want to interact that way as well. Um, Sharon, can you pause the music? All righty. So welcome everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. We are glad that you are with us. My name is Lavasha Smith, and I am the program manager with the Open Road Fund. I am one of five who you may see here tonight who helps to oversee the Open Road Fund program at Nexus. This is the third workshop of the Black Wealth Education Series. The first two series were focused on financial well-being, and tonight we're going to talk about housing and shelter. And then we have three more sessions after tonight, which you'll hear a little bit more about at the end. So before we get into the agenda, I just want to give you all some background about Nexus and the Open Road Fund program for those of you who may or may not be familiar with it. So Nexus Community Partners is a nonprofit organization that's located in St. Paul, Minnesota, whose mission is to build more engaged and powerful communities of color by supporting community wealth building initiatives that expand community wealth and foster social and human capital. So each of the programs inside of Nexus is all rooted in serving communities of color and fall under one of the three ships, is what we call it, or categories. So for example, you see at the top is authorship, and that's where most of our community engagement programs are housed under, such as our NLP, our Neighborhood Leadership Program. We also have our leadership ship, which houses our boards and commissions leadership institute. And then we have our ownership ship or category, which is where the Open Road Fund program is housed. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Open Road Fund, this is a program that is stewarded by Nexus Community Partners and funded by the Bush Foundation. The program awards individuals $50,000 grants to individuals of African descent whose ancestors were enslaved as a result of the mid-Atlantic slave trade. This effort serves as a catalyst for Black wealth. It is not a reparations fund, but a wealth building fund. The fund serves Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota, and is designed in partnership with the community around 5 wealth building themes. So the financial well-being, housing and shelter, education, economic ownership and power, and health and healing. And so we sorry, my screen is kind of going crazy. We have 5 staff who are working closely with the program, but we also have a Black staff assembly here at Nexus who also works closely with us. We also work in partnership with Research and Action, who's doing some evaluation work. And we also work with a wonderful, lovely advisory committee, who you see here listed. And they've been working with us since the beginning of the program, helping us to shape program guidelines, things like naming the fund, eligibility criteria, amounts of the awards, so on and so forth. And they also represent the 3 regions, so Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota, as well as like greater Minnesota as well. And so some of you may have participated, but for those of you who didn't or don't know what it is, we did a Black Wealth survey last year with in partnership again with Research and Action, the advisory committee, and Black staff, where we asked Black folks what they thought Black wealth was, came up with this definition, and then also the wealth building themes, which you see here on the screen. And so for tonight's session, it's housing and shelter. And this is how our community defines housing and shelter and how we see housing and shelter with the Open Road Fund. So I will give you guys just a few seconds to kind of read this and take it all in. All right, next slide. So for the agenda tonight, we've already done the welcome and the overview. Before I get into logistics, I just want to remind folks that tonight we are here sharing space with one another. This is a Black Center space, although all are welcome to join the space tonight. It's a safe space where we really honor self-care. So if you need to step away or turn your camera off, please take care of yourself during this session tonight. If things come up, they may trigger you. Again, feel free to take care of yourself in the way that you best know how. We will reserve questions and answers at the end of the session. If there's some questions that come up before that or some comments, feel free to interact in the chat. But for the Q&A section for the panelists, we really want to encourage you all to use that Q&A icon down at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer to interact, so that way it doesn't get lost in the chat. So we will, I'll pass it over here to our moderator in just a bit. We'll have some background and some history, watch a video, talk about the climate of housing and shelter today, and how that relates to wealth building in the Black community. We'll have some panelist discussion, and then we'll open it up to you all to ask us some questions or ask the panelists questions and get some answers to those questions. We'll try our best to get to all the questions, but we can't guarantee that we can answer them all tonight. This session is being recorded, so if you want to go back and watch it or share it with family and friends, feel free to do so. And then we'll also share some resources, send out a survey to you all at the end so you guys can fill it out to tell us about tonight's session and your experience, and then we will close it up. Alrighty, so I'm going to pass it over to our moderator for tonight. Our moderator for tonight is Kirstin Burch. She is a Family Housing and Fund Program Director and also an advisory committee member. So I'm really excited to have her moderate for tonight's session. So I'll read her bio. Kirstin leads program strategy and oversees the implementation of strategic initiatives. Kirstin is an experienced leader in both the local government and nonprofit sector. She brings expertise in culturally inclusive relationship building, community engagement, policy development, regulatory and systems change, and affirmatively furthering fair housing. Kirstin holds a BA in Individualized Studies, studying the intersections of culturally inclusive approaches to economic advocacy and leadership from Metropolitan State University, and a Leadership in Affordable Housing certificate from Hamline University. So everybody, welcome Kirstin.
Thank you, Lavasha, and thank you all for joining us. It's good to be here with you. We are really excited and looking forward to this robust conversation tonight that gives us space to both reflect on the history of housing and shelter and look forward to opportunities and bright spots to reimagine the way housing and shelter can contribute to wealth building for the Black community on our terms. With that, we also want to acknowledge folks who may be experiencing housing instability and the reality that we're all navigating our own housing journeys and housing goals on our own time with our own experiences, and that all of us are worthy of stability, wellness, and safety in our housing. With that, we want to start off the conversation tonight by sharing a brief video that really goes over the history of racist housing policies and how redlining has stifled African-American generational wealth building through housing. So I will turn it over to play the video.
Many people lost their homes during the Great Depression. Plus, housing construction came to a halt. So under President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, the government created the Home Owners Loan Corporation, or HOLC, in 1933, and the Federal Housing Administration, or FHA, in 1934. The FHA insured mortgages that resulted in the mass production of houses for suburban subdivisions built strictly for white people around the country. The wording in the HOLC contracts actually forbade properties from being sold to anyone who wasn't white. The FHA also created a new mortgage system, which made housing in the suburbs affordable, the same mortgage system that is used to this day. But black people were not granted access to these new affordable loans. As a matter of fact, in 239 US cities, the HOLC created color-coded residential security maps to decide where mortgages could or cannot be issued. The maps categorized neighborhoods by 4 grades: green, blue, yellow, and red. Green was for neighborhoods where professional men lived. These neighborhoods lacked, quote, a single foreigner or Negro. These were the easiest neighborhoods to get an FHA loan. Neighborhoods in red zones were considered hazardous because of infiltration by, quote, an undesirable population. These were predominantly black neighborhoods and were completely ineligible for FHA loans. Today, this practice is known as redlining. With virtually no other homeownership options, African Americans in cities were forced into neighborhoods that received little to no access to credit, mortgages, investment from banks, insurance companies, and savings and loans associations. Local banks considered these neighborhoods unfit for investment. Man, entire blocks were empty and crumbling. Access to health care, retail stores, and grocery stores with healthy foods was scarce. With limited businesses in the area, employment was rarely available, and crime in these neighborhoods often followed. If an African American in one of these redline zones wanted to buy instead of rent, remember, they wouldn't have access to the FHA loans their white counterparts did. So, in some places like one neighborhood in Chicago's West Side, black people had to buy on contract. This was a predatory agreement where the buyer would often purchase the home at about twice the price that the seller had paid. The seller kept the deed until the house was fully purchased, in contrast to a normal mortgage where buyers can gain equity in the meantime. If the buyer missed just one payment, they would lose their down payment, all their previous monthly payments, and even the home itself. The seller would get full rights to the home back and repeat the same predatory practice with another black buyer. On the other hand, white families were able to send their children to college using the equity they built. They were able to take care of their elderly parents and didn't need to depend on their own kids financially once they got old themselves. Most notably, they were able to build generational wealth for their families. None of these benefits accrued to African Americans. For decades, redlining was responsible for a widening disparity between a prosperous suburban America and impoverished inner cities. Finally, in 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act, which made it illegal to discriminate in the sale or rental of housing in any neighborhood. It also made neighborhoods where FHA loans were accepted accessible to black people for the first time. But by then it was too late for many black families to afford the houses that had risen significantly in price over decades. Also, redlining policies were difficult to eliminate and have continued even in recent years. In 2010, the U.S. Justice Department discovered Wells Fargo Bank had used similar policies to charge higher fees and rates to Black and Latinx people. It also placed them in predatory subprime loans. A New York Times article exposed loan officers who called Black clients, quote, mud people, and the risky subprime loans they pushed on them, quote, ghetto loans. In 2017, the home ownership rate of Black families in the U.S. was 44%, compared to 73.7% for white families. According to the Brookings Institution, wealth is defined as total assets minus total liabilities. In 2017, Black wealth in this country mounted to about 5% of white wealth, even though their income was about 60% of what whites made. The disparity in wealth is because, according to Forbes, equity from homes is the most consistent way to build wealth in this country. But without the same advantages, Black people were boxed out of the best opportunity to gain generational wealth for almost half a century. African Americans have always had good reason to be skeptical of the American dream, because for most, that's all it was, a dream.
Thanks for that. As you can see in the video, it really highlights how the lack of access to homeownership coupled with predatory and extractive policies and practices is a major driver of the racial wealth divide. If we look at, in just a moment, we'll have a slide up that gives you a snapshot of where the homeownership rates sit currently in the states of Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Looking at that information, it's important to see that just 15, 25, and 31% of Black households own their home, respectively, when looking at the three different states. This really means that anywhere from 70 to 85% of Black residents across the three states are participating in the rental housing market or are navigating non-traditional housing and shelter options. And this is not only true because of the long history of intentional exclusion, but present-day realities continue to stifle homeownership access and wealth-building opportunities. Traditional homeownership as a wealth-building vehicle does not work the same for Black households. In particular, I know many of us have heard stories related to appraisal bias and the way that houses are valued lower merely because it's known that the owner of the home is Black. And additionally, Black households tend to utilize mortgage products, particularly FHA mortgages, more often, which come with additional costs like required private mortgage insurance. Housing supply also plays a role in affordable homes. Affordable homes tend to exist and be purchased in neighborhoods that have higher BIPOC populations and historic disinvestment, which contributes to lower appraised values and higher assessed values, which in turn, that means a higher property tax payment and a lower equity in the home that you can actually leverage towards wealth building. All things considered, the relative cost and risk associated with homeownership are higher for Black households, and the opportunity to leverage this investment for wealth building is severely impacted. In Minnesota in particular, there have been historic level investments in homeownership, resulting in $150 million being available to support first-generation home buyers in achieving their homeownership goals. $50 million of which will be available through Minnesota Housing, and $100 million will be available through some soon-to-be identified community partners that will provide critical resources to making single-family homeownership a reality for those who seek it. Next slide. But we also know that ownership can be achieved in multiple ways. And when considering the way the Black community define the role of housing and shelter in wealth building, the American dream of a single family home may not be everyone's dream or reflect our cultural richness and celebrate housing choice. As you can see on this slide, we really want to lift up the multitude of housing and shelter options that are available. Some of the more common models like single family or small multifamily ownership, where an individual or a family owns the structure and the land it sits on and uses it as their place of residence, offers it as rental housing, or some combination of both is some of the common ways that we see housing being accessed through ownership. There's also traditional renting, where an individual resides in a structure that they don't own, but they pay the owner for the duration of their residency. Land trusts also provide an individual ownership opportunity where the individual can purchase the residential structure, and the land that it sits on is held in trust. And between the land trust and the individual owner, the equity built in the home is shared. This allows for a more affordable entry point to homeownership, and it preserves affordability for future owners and community. Some less common options that are emerging include tiny homes and tree houses that provide opportunities for creativity, sustainability, and a connection to nature and community while meeting shelter needs. Housing cooperatives provide an ownership model that divides ownership interests in the property through shares of a corporation, where residents pay a monthly fee to cover property-related expenses and share in the decision-making for the structure. And other less traditional options include mobile home communities, accessory dwelling units, which are dwellings that can be attached or detached from the main residential structure and provide a separate living space that can house a renter or support multi-generational living, and the conversion of structures that can provide single room occupancies, which often include sleeping and bathroom facilities to meet basic needs and are often associated with more congregate living opportunities. As you can see, there's lots of ways to meet housing and shelter needs, and each individual or family can choose what best meets their needs. To dig deeper into the ways housing and shelter can afford us opportunities to build wealth, we'll jump into our panel discussion. I'll start first with introducing our panelists for tonight. First, we have cultural architect Kimani Beard. Kimani is co-founder of Summer Cypher LLP and a member of the Philadelphia Community Farm Intentional Living Community, creating authentic spaces where people and community can immerse themselves into a process of self-exploration and critical reflection within the raw elements of hip hop culture and nature, providing intentional spaces for people of all ages to explore undiluted, uncut, authentic expressions of hip hop in safe, inclusive, interracial, intercultural, and intergenerational healing environments. Connecting with the community and the foundational elements of hip hop culture and nature has always been a passion for Kimani, and the inclusion of people in its entirety, expressing the true core values of grassrooted hip hop culture and its meaning. The connection has guided Kimani on a path to understand people on a more simplistic level through sound, art, nature, basketball, culinary, music, creativity, and vibrations that are natural healers in itself, relating to people in regards to the struggles and adversities that all of us hit on a day-to-day basis. Next slide. Next, we have retired banker and community development advocate, Sharon Garth. Sharon has worn many hats over the years during her career in banking and community program development at Wells Fargo. She's been instrumental in the nucleus of homebuyer programs and creating policies that focus on eliminating barriers to homeownership, particularly for Black and low-income households. She also has had a hand in developing the supplier diversity program that helped small BIPOC businesses land larger company contracts. In the late 80s, Community Investment Act regulators held banks accountable for redlining practices and perpetuating segregated communities by denying lending in less affluent neighborhoods. Sharon was hired to be a liaison between Wells Fargo Bank and the community to address inequitable lending issues through a pilot initiative called the Community Homeownership Program. The program began in Minnesota, and Northwest Bank, Wells Fargo's predecessor, funded the first effort with an unprecedented $10 million. This eventually became a national initiative, and the Community Development Homeownership Center was created to give residents tools and resources, as well as provide down payment assistance to successfully purchase homes. Next slide. And last but not least, we have Bloomington Housing and Redevelopment Authority Administrator Aarica Coleman. Aarica has been in real estate for over 25 years. When she worked as a property manager for an affordable housing complex in 2014, she learned much more about this work and asked herself, who's making these rules and decisions on what's affordable? That question is her motivating force to expand housing opportunities. She believes and knows that a big issue is that the average person does not have the information they need about housing, yet they are living and navigating it in every single day. Housing is a basic human right, but it's not treated as such. I want to thank all three of our panelists for being here tonight. We have a series of questions that we will ask them and give them about 2 to 3 minutes to respond. So I don't want to rush you along, but we do want to make sure we get the richness of your expertise on kind of the various questions that we have. So maybe starting with Kimani and then going to Sharon and Aarica, can you first share a little bit about your work experience and your work in housing, and tell us how it contributes to building wealth in the Black community?
First of all, thank you for having me involved on this panel and discussing just, where my just sort of natural aspects in relating to housing and community. Um, Essentially getting involved with and being a part of Philadelphia Community Farm, the aspects and opportunities that I was able to get in contact with through Summer Cypher as well has brought this all into an aspect of exploration and being able to create a level of like-mindedness and needs through the raw elements of hip hop culture, grassroots, ancestral aspects, and all in all, like the needs of what we are looking for, and the relatability to just create healthy atmospheres, and exploring into a level of what it would be like to be in community, farmland, rural areas. So those things have all found a way to link through various discussions through Summer Cypher, which is a raw, pure, unadulterated hip hop cohesion of our community to share within art, exploration of life, and all things, including how to gain access to different areas, in particular to Philadelphia Community Farm, and creating what you were showing before in the past slideshows around different living possibilities, yurts and tree houses and other levels of housing. So it's been able to connect things in a level to explore aspects of like-mindedness through utilizing the tool of hip hop and its grassroots to build a like-mindedness and connectivity to exploring the needs of what that looks like in multiple areas. Familiarity being the key.
Thank you so much. Fun to Sharon.
Yes, thank you, and good evening. I'm just thrilled to be here with all of you, and just thrilled to be here with this panel of young people who are really following in community development, organizational development, and all the things that we need in our community to be strong and healthy and to be vibrant. So I'm just happy to be a part of this, and just to lend what little I have to hopefully give you even more to stand on than you already do. So I'm just going to start with giving you a little bit about my background, because I think my background really helped to shape how I ended up going into an area such as I did. So I graduated from Central High School in St. Paul 1 year after Martin Luther King was assassinated. So I'm almost telling my age, but I'm not going to tell it today. But I say all that to say, in our generation, we were about civil rights, human rights. We lived it, we breathed it. It was our soul's ambition. We wanted to make a difference for our community, and for our families, because we had seen, we had actually seen some of the systemic and ongoing racism and exclusion in our life. We lived it. We lived through that as children, and we saw how Rondo was just decimated. Saw families coming home from work and there was a yellow slip on their door that said that in 30 days or whatever the case may be, you and your family have to be gone. Nothing about where you're going, nothing about how you're going to get there. We're taking this over. And so my passion comes from the pain that I experienced as a child, seeing my family, my community, families, seniors, aunts, uncles that I loved, just being pushed out with nowhere to go. And it was generational, because often there were, not grandparents, their sons and daughters, and then their grandchildren all in one house. So they're throwing out 3 generations in at a while. So it's very it was very impactful. So coming through the civil rights movement, I was part of the NAACP, the Urban League, the churches. Wherever there was something going on about human rights and us being able to stand for ourselves, I made it a point to be a part of. As I talked about Rondo being decimated, we were part of the fight. We, the community, were part of the fight against it. And some of the things that we received because of our fight, of course, Rondo did, the 94 did come through. Rondo was wiped out, but there were a few handouts, if you will, that we received. And one of those things that I'm going to just mention was that land was set aside where I live today, which is called Central Village. And right now it's in its 50th year. So I built my house 50 years ago this year. As a symbol of yes, they took away our housing, but we still stand, and we strongly came back into our community in not only Central Village, but there are other areas including where in St. Paul. My point to that is that we now are moving into an era where Central Village is becoming part of the wealth building strategy. And we want to know how we can work to make our properties available to young people who are coming in, who want housing and want to affordable housing. And we want to work to see how we can make that happen. So one of the things that I did do, because I was so active in the community, when Wells Fargo was looking for a place, and back then there was no such thing as Wells Fargo, it was Norwest Bank. So they were really looking for a way to reach into the community and begin to make change. So they had, my name kept coming up as a change agent, as someone who was fighting for against the injustices, and someone who wanted to see a better way for our community. And particularly, my focus was housing, education, and generational wealth. So I was talking about that. Can't say it again. I almost told my age. Wow, I gotta watch that. A long time ago. They hired me to come in and be that liaison, though. And when I came in, I came in with a vision and a purpose, but it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was so much bigger than me. It was the community. And no one can orchestrate something as large as that other than the Almighty. And I was just a tool. I was a vehicle But we were able to come in and build relationships between the bank, started with Norwest Bank, but then it went to First Bank, TCF, Cherokee Bank. They were all redlining. There was no banks that was serving Black people, period. So Wells Fargo's name may come up, but there were none in Minnesota that were giving us any loans until this process we started. And when we started the process, it wasn't just about Norwest, but Norwest brought other banks in. I don't want to go too long here. I just wanted to kind of lay that seed so we can come back and talk about some of the steps and some of the things that we were able to accomplish and some of the things that you all are now benefactors of, holders of, that you can work on and grow and water and make beautiful flowers over. So I'm going to stop right here for now, and then we'll continue on.
Absolutely. I appreciate your insight, and I will pass it over to Aarica.
Thank you, Kirstin. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for having me. And so my work and how my work contributes to building Black wealth or wealth in the Black community. One, I'm the sum total of the community that raised me. And so I know Rondo community in St. Paul came up. That's my family too, as way by Mississippi and Tennessee. So that speaks to the sum total of the community that raised me and the DNA running through my veins. However, I work in government. So that has been brought up. My work is to be over the Housing and Redevelopment Authority for the city of Bloomington, a suburb in Minnesota. Each city has something along these lines, but it works anywhere from outside unsheltered homelessness to preservation and new construction of single family, multifamily homes and everything in between. That's administering housing choice vouchers or renting property or anything like that. And so I mention that and give that brief background because I'm an appointed government official. And so what does that really mean? I help make policy. I help direct where the funds are going. I help make sure that the mission that we are supposed to uphold to serve those that are not adequately served by the marketplace, which is everybody, actually has an opportunity to be served. And so how am my work in particular helping to create or generate or build wealth in the Black community is one, I am a Black woman, so I'm gonna show up as my authentic self. And being the sum total of the community that raised me, I do have a responsibility to my people that are community as well as others, but more specifically, if it was intentional by the government to discriminate against Black people, foundational Black Americans in particular, then we need to be just as intentional about doing things, money, policy, access, opportunity, and listening, right? Because those that are being the most discriminated against and or that are experiencing things can tell you what they need to get out of it. So what my job is to lead that and direct that for the city of Bloomington, but that does not just mean Bloomington, because housing, real estate, it's all interconnected. So I help influence the work of Minneapolis, St. Paul, other suburbs, maybe even things that might be statewide or even nationwide, depending on what the initiative is. That is my role. And so my role is to listen to you all, to bring that back, to inform policy, to inform where money is going, which a budget is a moral document, and to carry that out and to leave that legacy, not only of myself, but those that are coming behind me, and to make sure that I am reaching back and doing that. So thank you.
Thank you all. And your responses to our first question is a perfect segue to our second question. And I'll go in order again, Kimani, then Sharon, then Aarica. But can you share a little bit with us about the role that policy plays in housing and shelter and how we can build more awareness around those policies? And if you have any thoughts on how we should be getting involved regionally or federally. I'll start with Kimani.
To be, very frank and just forthcoming as far as this particular question, when it comes to, my thoughts around like policy and housing, shelter, and how we can build more awareness around them. I don't necessarily feel that I have the the qualified expertise in the policy as much as I do have ways in which to figure out solutions and build wealth and build emotional support, security, things of that nature to be more exploratory in the blueprints and the things that it is that we've been able to accumulate historically, foundationally, those pieces to really be able to tap into the necessary things of our culture, our heritages, to really bring something to light and create the opportunities through like-mindedness, through like-mindedness, through connectivity, through the types of things that it is that we want to continue to see within our community and don't have and want to grow. And it does create challenges on levels of thinking outside the box, things that have created high levels of marginalization through our communities. What we don't have access to all of those different variables. And when I think about this, it makes me really think about how do we really circle back and get to our roots of simplicity and ease and perspective, like-mindedness, the things that are very simple to us that we can relate to, and foundational pieces to really stick something together. And it's questions to us on what levels do we want to sacrifice in order to achieve these goals and to build community, and what does it look like to go back to those, thinking about myself, 50 years old and being with my grandmother in the same crib with the family, and knowing that there was levels of some kind of structural foundational growth, and what we do to continue to uphold that is the choices that we wanted to need to make and stay committed to in those practices, because I think simplicity in the structures that we built, things that it is that we've created, are key essentials to being able to create the kind of policy that it is that we aspire to attain. What does that look like for us? And when does the establishing of what we want come into play, hold that, and create our own I guess sort of rules, policies, regulations, if you will, I guess within the confines of that law, or what does it mean to, get into our own conscious way of living and living off the land, and still being connected to hip hop, but still connected to our art, but having the space and those things. And how does that really come about? And I think that by establishing and reconnecting or staying connected to our grassroots, our ancestral practices, and pure, just rawness of the culture, I believe allows a level of thinking that's necessary to then achieve what it is that we feel like we want to sustain within our community.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'll pass it to Sharon.
Yes. I want to say that that's kind of where I spent my life. So my job was really to bring the community and the bank together to tear down the walls of the policies and the procedures that had kept us out of any kind of financial award gain moving forward. Blacks as a people were just absolutely left out and could not, in most cases, even find a path through. So what I worked on most of my life was, and found out and brought solutions to, was what role does policies play in housing and shelter? I would say policies, processes, procedures are the root. They're the foundation holders for systematic discrimination. That's where it all rests, right there. That's why you call it systematic discrimination, because they have written, because policies are written in such a way as to either allow certain people in and to leave certain people out. So they're very clearly defined, and it's very clear to see who is accepted and who is not accepted by reading any policy or procedure. I don't care if you go back to the 30s, 40s, or 50s, or if you look at them today. It's very obvious who is the benefactor and who is not included. So what I would say to that is that there is a methodology in bringing people together from both sides. You know, you have to bring both sides together. You have to come together and sit in this uncomfortableness of the outcome of what these policies and procedures have done to certain groups, certain people, so on and so forth. And you are here, we are coming together to remedy that, to rectify that. We are going to be building the solutions. So you give them the opportunity to be a part of moving things forward, and everyone is in the room. It's effective, it's hard work, it's tough work. But I'm so glad to see now that there's so many of you. There were only one or two of us back when we were doing it. You all can do marvelous things. Oh my God, if you get together, woo! I just want to be in the room, you know, can I just be there to hear or see or whatever? Because the end result, when you put aside the difference, and be it color or money or whatever the case may be, the more people that you can get into wealth building, the better the community is, the better the state is, the better the country is, so on and so forth. And so it's a momentum once it starts. Then now everybody, you know, once it starts, everybody then wants to jump into it. You know, we've become again so segregated. You know, right now we're way back to we were when I was born. You know, we're right back there right now, segregated. So we're gonna have to find a way to pull these people together, everybody, you know, and because the numbers don't lie. When we started with a $10 million housing program for low and moderate income people, and in 1 year met $10 million in Minneapolis and St. Paul, we weren't even a metropolitan wide. That was 1 year. By the time I left, we were making 100 million a year. The program had been accepted, of course, by then. throughout the company. But $100 million a year in new loans just to low and moderate income people.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win
Mhm.
when you can bring it to the table, work through it, and bring about the change. So
Thank you.
stop
Thank
there.
you. Thank you so much.
I've got some.
I appreciate the insights. We'll turn it over to Aarica to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. So a few things. So what roles does policy play in housing and shelter, and how can we build more awareness around them? And what roles should we play? And how do we get involved regionally, federally, whatever it may be? So a couple of things. It can all be so simple, but you rather make it hard, right? To quote Lauryn Hill, that's really what this is. Policy, procedures, process, guess what? It's people making rules to discriminate or to benefit people. And so when we think about what role does policy play in housing and shelter, it literally plays every last role. First of all, real estate is the key economic driver of this country. It's what this country was built upon. And when I say real estate, I'm talking about the improvements, land, businesses, but I'm talking about our ancestors as foundational Black Americans who were able to be mortgaged, literally mortgaged in some of these states. So real estate is a key economic driver. Housing and shelter falls under real estate. In Minnesota in particular, and I know we have North Dakota and we have South Dakota, but in Minnesota in particular, we have some of the strongest property rights. When we say we have some of the strongest property rights, we're talking about policy, law, legislation. It's at the state capitol that dictates what can and cannot happen, how the government can come in and buy something, how you can sell something, where a realtor's involved, mortgages. So policy plays a part in everything. It plays a part in everything I do every day. So bring it back down to how you can get involved and what the role is. One, everybody's got to pay attention. And where does that start? That starts with listening here, speaking up, being in community with like-mindedness, like my brother Kimani mentioned, but also I need you to vote. Anybody that's able to vote, I need you to vote, because the people that are in these positions are making the decisions that impact your day-to-day life. And when I say the people in these positions, let me break that down for you, because I'm not talking about the president, the vice president, Senate, Congress. I'm talking about city council, school board, county commissioners, right? So I'm talking about regular people that you may not see from day to day or understand what their roles may be, but they are passing policy. They are dictating rules. Case in point, I'm on this panel with my sister here, Kirstin, and Family Housing Fund is a nonprofit convener. Family Housing Fund can, as a convener, can influence different things when it comes to local government and state government, because they do the research, they collect the information, they have the pulse with the community, the Black community, but also low, moderate income, which, by the way, is a proxy in government. Low and moderate income has always been a proxy. That means under 80% AMI, but really that's what's been used to try and reach Black folks or people of color. Instead of just explicitly calling us out, they're like, oh, you're mostly are poor. So we're going to create a program. Again, that's policy. Create a program under this policy to fund it so that we can help you. And so how do you play a role? You pay attention, you vote, you show up. Y'all got voices, y'all be using them, y'all be sharing information. You got to show up in those spaces. Case in point, Minnesota passed a billion plus housing bill last year in the last session. Now, I can't even imagine what that looks like if I was to look at $1 billion, but it is to fund multiple things throughout the state around housing. And right now, there's different organizations and entities that are trying to apply for that money. Kirstin mentioned the $50 million first generation down payment assistance through the state, and $100 million through other to be identified agencies. So when you think about that, it's paying attention, it's at the schools, it is at your local city, school boards, county, things like that. That's how you can get involved, and that's how policy is impacting your life every single day. And by the way, as your rent goes up or your mortgage, insurance, or property taxes go up, whether you're renting or owning, you are paying those taxes that are help funding those services that are provided by the local government, city, county, state, that are making the policies that are influencing your life. So I just want you to really understand that policy literally is everything. And there's a difference between policy and practice. And once you familiarize yourself with the policy of looking up what elected officials, appointed officials, or just staff may be doing, then you can be able to come back and say, oh, I got educated on that policy and what you're doing is a practice. So therefore, I'm gonna need you to change that and provide what I have asked for per the policy. So that's how it's impacting, and that's the role you can play.
Thank you, and appreciate again the nice segue to our next question. With all of these insights, policy, human-centered focus is all interrelated. But maybe we can move to thinking about where you see opportunities related to housing and shelter for us as a Black community to build wealth, whether that be through traditional or non-traditional housing and shelter opportunities. So I'll start with Kimani.
Sure. So loaded. Such a situation. I mean, really, you know, I have to speak in the present and the now, like the actual blueprint creation of once again, you know, like-mindedness and relatability perspective. I'm not going to be able to get away from that, because that is exactly what has been seen through the community thus far in order to see what the possibilities are. See, once again, we have to know that, like, sometimes we don't always think that wherever it is that we go, we can be our authentic selves, and how to show up and wherever it is that we are at, country, rural, farm, city, block to block, whatever the case may be. And so it comes down to well, in my opinion, is how to figure out the ways to create the relatability and the practices within, in order to create the things that it is that we want, and also where do we want to live, where do we want to be, and what does it look like to foundate on those things without thinking that something needs to be left behind. And these are actual steps in my own movement through life that I can speak on, is understanding what it was like to create or build in this aspect of what hip hop and nature feels like. And when we think hip hop, not just the, you know, this whole overblown, you know, just pop aspect, whatever the case may be. I'm talking about like really getting rooted into the things that made us feel good, and then getting into like, okay, how do we take these very essential things and then create what it is that we actually want, with enough like-mindedness and people to prepare to, in order to grow this level of community and building wealth. Those tools and everything, we have tools. We can, and we have accessibility to things, but and at the same time, it's how and whom we're connected to in order to build what it is that we actually see, without the fear of like losing or not being feeling, you know, unwanted, and removing that and getting that out the way, and literally walking this aspect of like, oh, okay, I'm here on this farm building something, and I'm hip hop personified 100%, 73 baby, taking that and figuring out how to make sure that I can travel with that, and that it comes with me, because I still need to maintain and connect to that like-mindedness, and I need others to be able to see that as well. And I think that some of that perspective is you know, can be misconstrued or kind of lost, because, you know, it is about seeing and valuing the perspectives of how we can like really build that wealth, and ego plays a part, ideas, you know, who has this and what, but coming down to the basic sort of like structural needs in order to accumulate the wealth and accumulate what it is that we need. I don't think it's more so about not, you know, having the ideas as opposed to, you know, sometimes what are we able and wanting to move forward to and jump into, what are, you know, fears, things that we feel like that are going to pull us back, and what, you know, we continue to hit as these roadblocks, and so on and so forth. And what do we want to be open to, um, and desensitizing all the rhetoric that was, you know, that has been spewed over life, and what we hold within that, and that trauma that won't allow us to, you know, like reach further into what we want to do, what we aspire to attain. So I feel like if there's us being able to really stay, us staying related to our the perspectives that it is that we see, and how we can attribute that to our grassroots and to our building, and removing some of the things that it is that we block ourselves within. I think that if that level of perspectiveness and like-mindedness can be met, it gives an opportunity to really dive into our needs, the things that it is that we continue to not have, where what we feel that we can't get or receive, and being able to meet that the way that it is that we see through, like I said, once again, the like-mindedness, the looking each other in the eye, and really being able to fall into the types of things that it is that we see and we vision.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'll go to Sharon next. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I want to talk about three things here. Make no mistake about it. We've got to know our numbers. When I say that, what is the Black or the BIPOC buying power? And how can it be channeled? I'll come back to that. Number two, using that, we can create our own movement. We don't need anyone to move us. If we knew our power, we would all be walking lockstep together, and we would all be going for what we know we have coming to us. And number three, it's all about educating the community. You know, we've got to educate. Finances, finances, and then housing and wealth building is something that we don't talk about. It's not a major principle in our community. And if we don't make it as important as health, employment, then we're missing, I believe, the mark. And so when I go back to the buying power of Black or BIPOC groups, however you want to look at it, there are certain strategies that can be put around any group that's very simple, that can bring millions of dollars in days. And we see it on social media all the time, but I don't think we recognize it. And that is, if there is a reasonable cause, Hawaii, for instance, Hawaii was devastated. You know, when the you know, just this past summer, you know, and so, you know, the millions of dollars that poured into Hawaii was unprecedented. There was something I just saw the other day, which I hadn't thought about, but the 4 young people that were killed in out in the I'm sorry, the west. No, it was east. It was east. Up east. Anyway, there was so many people were disturbed that there wasn't a lot of evidence. There was nothing being found. And so people started sending their own personal resources, and then it became a social media trend. And all of a sudden they had millions of dollars and all kinds of additional assistance that brought, that they were able to actually track down a person that they said they would probably have never been able to identify. So I think we should take a time to really identify our cause, our purpose, our direction, where we want to go. We could create the same wave. You know, you can create your own wave. And then once you're moving in that direction, then you educate your community so that they walk alongside of you, and you know, they're the foundation for what keeps the whole movement going. So that is my thought about knowing the numbers. And there were a couple of personal numbers that I had sent over to Sharon, and I don't know, Sharon, if that'll work for you to
share those.
No,
to use those.
I was going to include those in our YouTube posting.
Okay. So with that, then I'll just stop right there.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. I'll turn it over.
Okay.
Thank you. So one, I want y'all to catch this point. From the McKinsey Institute for Black Economic Mobility, catch this point, that Black consumers' collective economic power was set to expand dramatically from about $910 billion in consumption in 2019 to $1.7 trillion in 2030. $1.7 trillion. So it says, even so, we are more likely than our non-Black counterparts to live in consumer deserts and be underserved across all areas of consumption. So how am I tying that back? If we are one of the largest consumers, we have buying power. Don't believe the lie. Part of the lie about us not having buying power is due to predatory and discriminatory lending practices. Notice I said practices and not policy. Catch that part too. So what that means is based on credit score, which that's a whole nother session about Social Security number and how they are coming up with our credit scores in a private industry. Anyways, credit scores can prevent us, or how we are looked at, from being able to access a mortgage, access the tool that white people have been able to use that was created for them. So let's be clear about that. Not only was these things created for white people, and not just white people, but white people of a middle class and upper middle class, because the poor white folks, it wasn't created for them. And public housing, welfare, all these other things were not created for us. But we are a resilient people, aren't we? So what are some ways that we as Black folks can build wealth within our communities? One of the things I want to be clear about is, if you want to own a home, own a home. That is great. You don't have to. Renting is okay. Renting is just fine. And you can still, in my opinion, grow wealth by renting, because you're going to do it in a smart way. So some of the things you can do is you can rent larger properties with multiple people. We are a communal people. Most people of color, and I don't even like that term, but most people of color are communal. we're a communal people of living together or working together or being in space, shared space together. Again, that's another policy that tells us we can't have so many people in the same space. So you can do that. I think a very big point that I like to tell people is if you want to buy a home, buy a duplex, buy a triplex, buy a property that is going to generate income. That's where one of the ways you can build wealth through housing. I want to be clear, housing is not the only way you can build wealth. It's just one of the ways you can build wealth. And also in building wealth, if you do not know how to leverage the property that you own, you're not going to build wealth. If you are going into a 30-year mortgage with the mindset, I'm gonna pay this mortgage off and then I'm gonna have a house with equity. If you don't know how to leverage your equity, then it doesn't matter the same way, I should say. I won't say it doesn't matter. So one of the things you can do is you can continue to rent, but you can buy a property that, yes, real quick, I see the comment. It's McKinsey, MC, capital KINSEY, Institute for Black Economic Mobility. That's the name of it. However, you can buy a property. I know Hope Communities, it's an organization in Minneapolis, Minnesota, does have a program that they work with Land Bank Twin Cities as well as City of Lakes Community Land Trust to be able to take renters who may be renting a property and be able to buy a duplex. And they do duplexes because they want to take you from being just renting to also being somebody that owns and can generate income. So that is one way. Another way is you can look at buying, like when you have businesses or things like that, buy that property. You can look at investing, work on being in a cooperative. There's a couple of things that I have worked with. One of them is NICE, Minnesota, Northside Investment Cooperative Enterprise. That is a play on words with Minnesota NICE. However, it is a cooperative model of centering Black folks to buy property and have together as a cooperative and have a share of that. So again, communal, you don't have to do it by yourself. That is what the Western civilization has taught us, that we need to do this by ourselves. And the way that this real estate industry, the housing industry is set up here in this country in particular, of going into debt to do something by yourself, to be able to say that you have a piece of the American dream, not sure if that's all of our American dream, it's just not the way that it really agrees with our values just as a people. So let me repeat, cooperative, you can be able to join that. That's a kind of a community type model. Land trust is a model where you do not own the land. You rent it on a 99-year lease. I believe now, I am a licensed real estate broker, but I believe now it is a stepping stone. And if you go into owning a land trust property with the understanding that you are buying a property for less money than it would if you stepped out and bought on your own, you may live in it. And then when you go to sell it or move, you have an equity sharing split. That equity sharing split allows another household, another family to be able to have the same advantages that you had the years prior. And from there, you can take your equity and go buy something else. You also can buy on your own, or you can continue to rent, okay? I just want you to know that as a community coming together, and I know that, I think it was Lavasha that put it in, buying the block. There's nothing wrong with us coming together, whether we are family, blood related or not. If we're like-minded, sit down and work it out and say, how are we going to buy these properties up? I'm telling you, everything is in a cycle. A neighborhood, real estate, it's a 25-year cycle. And what we see is that it comes out and things get built or brought to the market, that everything's going well, and it starts to decline. And when it starts to decline is when we start to hear about gentrification. Why? Because the model is as something starts to decline where it drops its value, it makes it easier for you to go in and purchase it and then turn it around. Gentrification by itself, and I'm gonna say it, y'all may be mad at me, is not a bad thing. Displacement though, that's a problem. But gentrification, as Black folks, we should be able to take full advantage of that same opportunity without displacing people who did not have another option or another ability. So again, back to the question, we're gonna say, cooperatives, land trusts, continue to rent, but buy investment property, but also buy commercial property. Rent out business space to other people. These are things you can do right now and buy the block. I don't care what block it is. I don't care if it's in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Detroit. I don't care. Buy the block. Get together with like-minded people and work to invest in things like that, such as real estate.
Thank you so much. This has been such an insightful conversation. I'm going to get ready to ask our final question that we prepared for our panelists, but starting to see questions pop into the Q&A. Please continue to populate those and we'll move right into our Q&A portion with our panelists. But maybe as a last question to you all, can you share a little bit or share maybe a resource or a funding initiative that is available in community that can be leveraged to help our community continue to build wealth? And if you maybe don't have an idea on a resource, maybe what is some insights you would share with someone who doesn't know where to start with thinking about how to build wealth through housing? So I'll start with Kimani.
Aarica, Sharon, it's been a pleasure being part of this panel and just hearing insight and information that is coming through, learning and hearing. Thank you, Kirstin, for your hosting, moderation. What community resources and funding initiatives are available? I can speak to one as a resource and saying it in a level of more learning and communal building, and that is sharing phillyfarm.org. And I say that because it is a tool in restoring health and vitality to people, animals, plants, and to the earth. And these are foundational things that could potentially be able to help you create and understand some of the things that it is that we want to build together in community, and in order to, like Aarica is saying, buying something, and if we buy something, what things are we going to continue to either do, sustain, grow, create foundation, long-term wealth, and being able to utilize those regenerative practices and access that it is that we have been able to cultivate, putting that into a place that you can, will be able to harness from, from a community standpoint. And I list PhiladelphiaFarm.org as a place to understand those different pieces around agriculture, education, conservation, life sharing, and arts as it pertains to some of our historical practices, our educational background, to utilize those things, tapping into some of those, old school things in order to almost just regenerate new practices on how we share space together, how we live communally, how we eat, how we sleep, how we all of those things that are I feel that are vital points to thinking about our mental health and levels of stress relief, reliability on others, and once again, like-mindedness. And PhillyFarm.org, we really practice in creating a consensus model around being able to live these things out as we move through. And I think that some of these attributes can also play a part in how we're rethinking what we're doing once we do find that property, buying up that property, and thinking about further relationships and other communities that we will expand to as we figure out how it is that we want to create our own, buying up what it is that we want, obtaining what we want, buying it at the drop of a dime. So it's still being able to have those resources to understand, like, oh, okay, if we're going to get these things, how do we build? And I think that what we're doing here is walking that out and being able to see the brown and Black community be exposed, privy to, witness to something that is happening in real time, and taking those things and applying them to things that are continuing to grow, and purchasing space within our communities in the city and in rural areas. So I'm talking, in both aspects, and not being limited to one specific thing, but just how to continue to build the relatability and an expansion of what it is that we aspire to do. And this is something that it is that we're living out in real time on how to create the healthy practices and consistency, and use some of these old ancestral models that are there in order to build the kind of wealth that it is that we want to. And I think it's just coming to a point of a full circle that we need to, kind of do in order to obtain some of these things. So phillyfarm.org is one. Midway Rise Up is also a foundation that we have works around housing displacement in the Midway area, and really would like to figure out ways to have more discussion about those needs, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to continue to babble on any further. I'm gonna wrap it up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Before I jump to Sharon, I want to make sure we leave a good amount of time to answer some questions from folks who are joining us today. So if you can keep your responses to about 2 minutes on this last question, that'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Creating wealth, there's in housing, it doesn't matter, if it's rental or ownership, and the various models that we've heard about. It's all a method of creating wealth. So we should be teaching or helping our community to know the strength that can provide to individuals and families. I don't think oftentimes that people realize even that there is a benefit to owning things. So I think we need to have a community story, build a community story about how important it is for housing. Most people work and they're getting some kind of investment with their company or their organization. Using those is another great way to build wealth, and that also supports the type of housing you can afford and the kinds of things that you can go after. And then overall, I would just love to see us create a community wealth building strategy. That would be something that would, I just think back to, a long time ago, but there were two little sentences that changed the course of economics in America. And that was a car in every garage and a chicken in every pot. And that was, and that changed the course. And so I think if we just think about that, how we could change our community and give them a purpose and a direction and a focus. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Aarica?
Thank you. So I'm gonna go a little quick here because I see there's chat questions coming in. So the question, community resources, funding initiatives that are available to the community, and how can we leverage them to continue to build wealth for our families? One, knowing about them, right? I mentioned $1 billion+ housing bill that was passed, at least in the state of Minnesota. That doesn't negate the different things that are coming from the federal government, because there are a lot of things happening. But in Minnesota, there's first generation down payment assistance that will be coming out, and there is a webpage that will be added for that. There is a Project for Pride in Living. It's a nonprofit that does career readiness and home buyer education, financial education, and credit counseling. These are things that you can go to, whether you're a renter or you're looking to buy. They also will help you if you're looking to buy and finding the different funding and different information so you can be successful. Because you don't just want to get into a home if you're buying, you want to be able to stay in the home and maintain it. There is Minnesota Home Ownership Center, which their whole focus and purpose is education around that. There is also something that's coming, and we're all waiting. And when I say we're all waiting, I mean government. The state of Minnesota has a housing finance agency. And in that $1 billion+ housing bill that they passed, $1 billion+ housing bill they passed in 2023 session, they said they were going to create a state rental assistance program that is going to mimic Section 8. And the reason I bring that one up is I see there's questions coming in, people can't find things that are affordable at 30% of their income. Well, there's a few reasons for that. One, inflation and incomes haven't kept up with the cost of living. But two, 30% is a practice. Again, it's not a policy. I'm sorry to break that down. However, it was passed by Congress to be a practice for public housing back in the 70s, 80s. And we've been operating off of 30% since then. I will just tell you that my staff who are administering the Section 8 program for the city of Bloomington do 40%. So just know that 30% is not a policy, it's a practice. And there's a lot of people getting further and further away from that. And even if you go to get assistance from some nonprofits, emergency assistance from nonprofits or things like that, they're also going to look at 40% because 30% at this point in this time is unrealistic. Hate to break that to you. It's sad, even though we say if you're paying over 30%, your housing cost burden. A lot of people are housing cost burden, whether they rent or own. So those are just a few things that come to mind right now that I would like to just shift so that we can answer your questions that are coming through.
I appreciate that. We will jump right into the questions that are coming in from our guests. And if you would like to answer it or have something to add to this question, just identify that you would like to respond. The first question is, can any of you speak on the large conglomerates that are buying up the real estate in our communities and other communities?
I can, because one, they're not. And I know that sounds odd, but there is another quasi-government entity, the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. A lot of people don't pay attention to the Federal Reserves, but you should, behind our money and policy. The Minneapolis Federal Reserve actually has done a deep dive into the research around this and come back with actually a lot of the properties in terms of single family housing are not owned by large corporations. It's actually more smaller owners that are owning those properties. But I will say this, because that doesn't mean anything if you can't find a property to rent or buy. I will say this, there are things in the works around different properties and different owners, in particular North Minneapolis, where it was cheaper at a time to be able to buy property, that you will see properties starting to sell. And the focus will be around emerging developers, Black, Indigenous people of color being able to purchase, opportunities for people that are at 80% AMI or below. There's going to be some concerted efforts around that. Where those large conglomerates came from, again, the 25-year cycle of real estate and of a neighborhood. Before the economic downturn in 2008, in places like St. Paul, North Minneapolis, we already felt it, because what happens if America gets a cold, Black folks get the flu, right? So that's already happened before everybody else was really experiencing it. And we were waving the white flag, but nobody listened to us. When it impacted everybody else and the stock market, then it became an economic crisis and a downturn. Well, in that downturn, there was a lot that happened, and a lot of small investors or now large investors, they weren't then, were able to buy property for cheap with the goal of being able to hold on to it and make a return. That's what you do with real estate. So that's what I can speak to about who has owned and is owning, but also that shift is about to come. Pay attention.
And the only thing that I would like to say about that is that's another opportunity for us as community to come together and say, okay, we know our communities, we know where communities are aging, we know where this is about to happen. You know, for those people, there are people looking to invest, wanting to be a part of how to redevelop the community. Finding a way to pull people together to do those kinds of things and turn property over within the community, the timing is right for it as far as I'm concerned.
Agree. Yeah, I just agree wholeheartedly with where Sharon is coming from. I just mock the words that that you were speaking, and you know, the connectivity and pulling together in order to create what's needed. Absolutely.
And as I said earlier, I live in a community, I live in one of those communities. So I'm trying to work with all organizations who are willing to help us revitalize our community and keep it vibrant while we move on and not turn it over. So I'm part of the leadership of this community that wants to make sure we maintain it for next generations.
Maybe I'll move to the next question. I know, Aarica, you shared some resources already, but is there any single agency you would point people to that would be well-versed in some of the information that's being shared tonight?
Go ahead, Sharon.
Yeah.
I was going to agree that I think the ones that Aarica gave were really good. I think you said model cities and home ownership center and some of those. So I mean, those are the ones that I know, you know, as well. And you probably, it's good to you know, when they're known and long-standing like that. I mean, there's a trust factor in there, so that's why I kind of stick with them.
Yeah, so I'll reiterate model cities, ASANC, PPL, Project for Pride and Living, PRG. But can we go back, because with Black folks on here, Build Wealth, Minnesota, right over in North Minneapolis. That is a great one. First Independence Bank. It's not just the nonprofits, it also is locations and areas where there is financial services happening. But in addition to that, there are local government organizations. I will say, at least in Bloomington, I know what my staff is doing as in the HRA. And I know that is a contact there, just because we work with PPL to provide opportunities around education for anyone, regardless if they live in Bloomington or not, called Journey to Homeownership. And really, it's just, what does it take? What's the process? What do you need to know? In addition to that, there are other organizations and nonprofits that aren't quite coming to mind, but if you go to the Minnesota Homeownership Center webpage, they also have a whole network, but also there's some resources that'll be provided here this evening.
This next question comes from an emerging real estate developer that wants to be intentional about incorporating sustainability into projects. Their question is, how do you envision sustainability when reimagining housing?
It goes hand in hand. And here's why. Because policy, we're gonna go back to policy. So case in point, as a government entity, but developers and nonprofits can too, I applied for funding from the Minnesota Housing State Finance Agency, because when the legislature at the state of Minnesota passes money, it has to flow through the departments that are at the state level. So some things for housing are gonna flow through Department of Human Services, Department of Health, and Minnesota Housing. So with that, I applied for funding to be able to build 27 new homes across the city of Bloomington that will be affordable at 80% AMI, and to use emerging small underrepresented, historically underutilized developers to build those properties. But what government put in place in terms of Minnesota housing is, well, they have to be enterprise green communities. So actually, because of that funding, we have to tie in sustainability efforts. So I say that to say, if you want to go towards passive house design or even net zero, the funding would be available in different areas of government as well as public sector. So like banks or different grant programs that you may see from different institutions. So when I envision sustainability, it is an underlying factor at this point. Minneapolis and St. Paul are a part of communities that they're going to put those things in place for anything that they build or allow to be built in their cities. And you can apply for additional funding if you want to choose to make it affordable in the end. A different funding that'll help you bridge that gap. We call it value gap. So the difference between what you can build the house for and then what you would sell it for. You can apply for that funding to make sure that those sustainability efforts are built in. So whether that is energy efficiency, passive house design, or even net zero, where you're not even using the typical things that we would use now, all that is possible. Just as you have highlighted here as being an emergency developer in sustainability, it's a little bit trickier in Minnesota when we have about 9 months of winter in a normal year. So just want to add that.
All right. And the last question I see here is, are there any mentors or help for individuals in this housing journey? Or where would you advise people go to seek support?
It's the same organizations that have been listed in terms of being nonprofits and whatnot, because that is what we have in terms of being able to provide mentorship to individuals.
And there are other resources that can be shared as far as different levels of grants programs that it is that we carry through Midway Rise Up that are shared, that can be more accessible and shared to the network that it is that is on the webinar currently, and that don't have the time at this point to mention, but I know we'll figure out ways to be able to share that and get that information across.
Wonderful. I don't see any additional, let me double check. I don't see any additional questions coming in through the Q&A or through the chat. So maybe I'll just take this moment before I hand it back to Nexus staff to thank our panelists. I really appreciate and value the depth of insights, experiences, and thought leadership you've provided to really help us see kind of not only our history and the way that we've been excluded from leveraging housing towards wealth building, but where there's really a lot of opportunity for us to think differently about it and work together. I think you're spot on when you talk about us being a communal culture and really wanting to build wealth together in community. There's lots of ways that we can reimagine how housing and shelter fit into that as a concept and as a vehicle. And so just thank you for your time tonight. Thank you for your leadership in our communities and advancing this conversation and advancing stability and economic growth for the Black community. I can't say it enough. It's tremendously helpful, and we're excited to share these resources with our community to make sure that people have access to the tools, the people, and the information that they need to make informed decisions and navigate this housing journey that we're all on. So I will hand it back over to Lavasha to share a little bit more about next steps and close us out.
Thank you. That was definitely a session tonight. I appreciate you as well, as well as Kirstin, in moderating tonight, and just appreciate the questions and answers. If you guys have more questions, feel free to put them in, and maybe we can answer them at a later time. So these are just some more resources for you all, because guys, we want you to walk away with something. The panelists have shared some really good resources, and these are just some additional ones. Some have been named, some haven't. And these are just some public resources. We don't necessarily partner with any of these right now, but just so that you guys have the knowledge and go get the research on your own. All righty. And so to close us out, we just wanted to highlight again our panelists and moderator for tonight. This is our full Nexus staff on the Open Road Fund, as well as Rapad Makai, who is our leader of Nexus organization overall. This is our contact information. So if you guys do have any questions after the session, feel free to email us or call and leave us a voicemail, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And I believe there is a link, or will be a link, to the survey for tonight. We invite also the panelists to fill out the survey as well, just to give us feedback on what's going well, what else do you want to hear about, what could be improved so that we can continue to have these sessions for you all, and that they're tailored to meet the needs that you in topics that you guys want to hear about. Hope I wasn't talking too fast. Thank you again. If you guys have any questions, feel free to send us an email and I will send you on your way. Have a good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Yes,
Good night.
wonderful evening.
You too.
All right. Peace now.
Good to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.
Peace. Good night.
Good night. Good night. Have a good weekend. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
All right, y'all have a good night.
You too.
Thanks, Kirstin.
Yeah.
All right, now, before I shut this out, I just need to save the chat.
Okay, I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna stop the recording.
Okay.